so you can hear that vibration while I'm making the cut. As that sound goes away, we're getting more round. We're not hitting any flat spots, so those little vibration sounds go away. That's part of how you can tell that it's getting round. We want to leave this guy as thick as it can be when we start, so we got a lot of meat left on our box. So as soon as it gets round, we'd like to come off with the tool and start making our plan. I'm going to make a couple more cuts here to make sure it's nice and smooth. And now we'll need to establish our first tenon. The tenon is going to be held in this chuck. We've got these little 3D printed replicas of these chuck jaws that will allow us to check our tenon and make sure it's right. The tenon is dovetailed, so for the sake of strength, we are going to want to make sure that our wood is angled at the correct angle to match this dovetail, and then we want a really nice clean corner on this inside corner, and we need a flat spot that sits on top of this jaw. To not get too technical, but explain why this matters so much, the strength of this will be holding the end of these pieces while we work out here. So the shoulder, the flat part that will be jammed up against the top of these chuck jaws, allows it to not waggle back and forth, and the dovetail kind of sucks it in to make sure it creates that pressure on the top. So the strength is on both of those things. We need flat on the top, we need to match this angle here, and if the wood is contacting those surfaces, there's nowhere for it to go very easily. So we're going to really pay attention to the detail on those. We can go in, if you use your thick parting tool, you can do like 1.5. With this little one, I'm going to do probably 3, at least 2.5 parting tool widths for my tenon depth. On this tenon, our other thing that we can't do is bottom the tenon out in the chuck. So if the tenon on this is so deep that it touches these inside metal pieces, it is not going to allow these jaws to hold the tenon as strong as it can. So we want to make sure that the tenon is long enough, but not too long. And with these little guides, you can hold it up here, and I can see that I've got, half of my space, but with a small project, this small tenon is more than enough to hold it. When we get to the bowl, we'll want it to be a little longer and get closer to the bottom, but we still can't bottom it out. So that's a pretty good depth. Now we need to get our angle. So I use a spindle gouge to do that, and I ease up on it. Don't want to make one glory cut to try to get this. I'll just take a couple, make sure, and then I want to make sure that this inside corner here is very tight so I can get the clean connection. So I go in from both angles and touch that corner just a little bit. Stop the lathe and get my gauge up here, and I've got a good connection. So you can see right there, that top shoulder is well seated, and the dovetail is seated on the inside of it. I've made a tenon that is strong as I can make it out of this piece of wood. So now we will take this and put it in a chuck and continue to work on the rest of it. And they'll be in 2 different parts, so I'll need a way to hold them both. I was getting ahead of myself. I need to make sure that I leave enough for this tenon. I'm gonna quit putting my pencil in different places.
Oh, it's down on the floor, next to you, to your right.
Thank you. If you put this up while the lathe is spinning, make sure that you only contact it with one side at a time. I would just err on the side of turning this off.
Yeah.
So I've got my depth there, and I can take my parting tool again and get to that step. We need to get our dovetail again, so I'll sneak up on that.
How come it's it's wonky on the outside, the shoulder?
Out here?
Yeah.
If you look at the, look up there, you can kind of see what it's doing.
Yeah, I haven't touched that with the
Okay.
tool.
Oh,
So
okay.
it's a couple degrees off from flat. Go back through, test that guy out. And that works good. I've got a nice connection on that inside clean shoulder. I've got a good connection on the dovetail, and I don't have a gap between the shoulder. It looks like I actually might have a little one, so I'm gonna clean up. I can see a little light right in here, and I feel like if I take a little out of the inside shoulder up here, that it'll seat a little better. I don't strive for perfection in very many things in wood turning, but if I found that if I don't strive for perfection here, my failure rate goes up a whole lot. So this is the one thing that I really make sure, spend extra time, triple check it.
So at this point, could either end be the top or the bottom?
Yes, at this point in time, we still haven't laid out our design, which is this will all be waste wood eventually. But I'm gonna be at 80. So pull out my handy pocket computer. Go to the golden mean calculator. Tell it there's 80. And it says the longer section is 49.443 millimeters, and the shorter section is 30.557. We'll call it 49 and 30. So I just enjoy that. It helps. I have rarely made anything using the golden mean that I have finished and did not like the proportions of it visually. Most of the time, if I do not like the proportions, it's because of the shapes that I put in the ratio as opposed to the ratio itself. Like the piece still looks pleasing, but I probably just put it, got it too lumpy on the outside or got too thin on the bottom and lost the ratio somewhere else. But laying these guys out at least gives me a good starting point. And visually, I don't want to go too far on these parting tool cuts, but I like having a shoulder that I can look at so I know where my piece is going to begin and end. So I just took that in to the point where it's not thinner than the tenon on the bottom. So I've still got all my strength in there. Visually I can see what's happening. And then for the middle here, I'm going to make 3 parting tool cuts side by side. So I'll make one right on this line. And if you are using one of the larger parting tools, this will be 1 parting tool cut. Maybe 1.5, but with these little guys, I need some room to get in there and know what I'm doing. Because I'll use this so I don't have to measure very much on my inside mortise and tenon that will hold this box together. If I don't have enough meat in here to do that, then I would have to get my calipers out and have to do a whole lot of measuring. But if I leave visual references on each side, I can turn into those and I can know where the inside of my mortise needs to be, where the outside of my tenon needs to be, and get really close to it before I have to start fitting it and turn the lathe off to do that every time. So I want to take this in enough to where I know I can have enough meat left in there when I get my outside shape going, because I don't want to have a thin shoulder for that mortise or the tenon to go into. So once I get it to this point, I turn the lathe down a little bit and then I part it completely in half. I want to make sure that I leave part of that parting tool cut on both sides, because I'm going to use that as my visual reference to turn to later. So make sure you take it out of the middle here, and we'll take this pretty far down. You guys get it down as far as you're comfortable with, and then I can come over and do the rest if you want, or we can use the little Japanese fuss cutting saws that we've used on some of our cutoffs to finish it out.
There you go. And when you cut the first line in the center, did you do it right in the middle of that line, essentially?
Yes.
Okay.
Did it right in the middle of that line, and then line one up on each side.
Okay.
Trying to maintain my...
On the outside lines, did you do, it looked like you didn't do
No, you weren't cutting in the center, you were cutting on the outside.
I cut on the outside of the outside line.
That's what I thought I saw you do. Yeah.
So now when I establish those, I like having a smaller top than base. So on this project, we've got to remember that we're going to need it to sit up. So we don't want to get the base too thin, but we would still like for it to look nice and look like it's supposed to sit there. So just make sure we don't go too far in on these cuts.
What speed are you working at?
2,500.
Oh, okay.
So now to save time, we'll get a drill bit out and get some of the meat out of here. We've got some of these drill bits out on the counter. We'll probably still have to share because we're all going to be using similar diameters. And I don't want to drill completely to the bottom here, because if I drill to the bottom, I'm going to get to the point where I've got a 1/4 inch of wood holding it down here, and I've got 3/4 of an inch of wood up here at the top. So I'm gonna drill it down about halfway so I can still have a good base to continue hollowing out the top, and then I'll use my tool or come back to the drill bit to get to the next depth.
So it's coincidentally that one of those marks up there, is that,
The depth gauge.
is that your?
That's somebody else's depth gauge.
Oh, okay.
So you could definitely make sure that you're doing this safely and decide
Yeah.
where you would want to go. It looks like that one's a little too deep for me, but I can see the 1.5, so I'm gonna just stop there visually. So we want to turn this down to drill. Go to, is it 620?
680.
680.
The speed's written on the side of the bit.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Oh,
You think that's 680?
I want numbers, I don't know.
So how do you lock that with it?
The drill bit?
Yeah.
So you want to make sure that you get it into the tailstock good, and the Morse taper will hold it for the most part.
Gotcha. So it's not. Oh, I guess other stuff has been on a bearing, so that is like designed to stay still.
Yep. So the other stuff has had a bearing in it that spins. This guy is just solid.
Gotcha.
And you're controlling the speed with that turn?
I'm extending the drill bit into the piece with the turn. And then I also provide some stability by hand. So I'm gonna hold this. If it starts twisting, I don't have a death grip on it. I'm just kind of gently holding it to help it not spin, but if it starts spinning, I'll remove my hand. I'm not going to try to stop it.
And back up.
Yes. Back out, you want to make sure that your hand's on here, because that will make sure that it pulls out and the Morse taper can hold it. There's some friction in there that wants to hold the warm drill bit inside of the hot wood. So if you just try to back it out without your hand on it, there's a good chance it'll pull it out of the Morse taper and hold the drill bit in the wood. So it just takes a little bit of pressure to make sure that it comes out, and just kind of pushing back against the tailstock. And you back it out, and we're good to go. And slightly below center, because I've got that nib that was left by the drill bit. So I'll raise it up just a tad. Now I'm there. So we've been cutting downhill on everything, and that's a great plan when we are doing spindle oriented things, but now that we're hollowing things out, we've got to think in a different direction. So to keep the wood laying down how we would like it to keep the fibers compressing in the right direction, we're gonna make a cut out. So the flute of this tool is closed almost all the way over, and I'm gonna be using this little shoulder up here, the corner of the fingernail. So if my finger was the bowl gouge, you'd be cutting over here by the edge of it. So I'll be making cuts going out to towards the outside. We don't want to be aggressive here, because we don't want to put a lot of pressure on that tenon that we've got in the bottom. So we want to take small, light cuts. And I want to leave my visual marker on the end of that where we turned it, and I left a little bit of this ridge on each side. I don't want to turn this ridge away yet. I want to decide which side is going to be my mortise and which side is going to be my tenon. I think I will put my mortise on the top and make the bottom receive the top. So I'll get some more of this removed. I want to make all my cuts here from the inside to the outside. So get down in the bottom there, and this is pretty far to hang off the tool rest. Probably get some scrapers out to make this a little easier. At this point, I've cut the bottom. I've got a little tear out in there. So maybe I've got a scraper here that might work. So this is going to be my mortise. My mortise will be on the outside of my little part that I left there to cheat. So I'll take the spindle gouge again, and I'll just work out to it. So right there it went away. I want to stop. I don't want to touch that anymore because I need to make sure that this will fit in it. Make sure it's deep enough because I'm going to end up extending this guy to make it a little deeper. I've already got it a 1/16 to an 1/8 of an inch down there, I guess. And that will be deep enough to take whatever tenon I put on the inside of the lid. At this point in time, we're going to want to look inside of this guy and get it finished, because as soon as we take this out of this orientation, we won't be able to get back in here safely. So this guy will need to be very close to our finished point. Sanding this guy is straightforward, but you've got to be very careful because you are committing your finger inside of this. So we can set up a pencil with some paper wrapped around, the sandpaper wrapped around it, that we can get in here and touch this guy. So if you do venture in there with your finger, be very careful and be ready to pull it out. And if you go very much deeper than an inch, inch and a half, you definitely would be wanting to use something other than your finger. Would you agree that it's safe to somewhat sand this? So to not bore you all, I'm not going to do it, but if you look in here, my attention to detail, I don't like the little ridge that I've left down in the corner, but working in there is going to be pretty tedious, and we're going to move on so we can get some tools in your hand and we can have some fun today. Other people can have fun because I'm having fun now.
And as you're doing that, we'll show you some tips on
And in this project, there is a whole lot of starting and stopping and dry fitting to make sure we're in the right place. And when you're making these cuts, remember that essentially whatever you take off of one side is being taken off the other. So we're removing, if we remove a millimeter, we're pretty much removing 2 from the thickness of our tenon, because we're taking it away from all the way around it. A millimeter on this side and a millimeter on this side at a time. The tighter fit we can get at this point means we've got the friction to hold these guys together a little bit better to finish our shaping. So I would like for it to be very, very snug.
Plus there's gonna be sanding, right, which will take a little while.
Yep. But when we sand, we are going to want to stay away from specifically this and our little ridge inside of here. We're going to leave those untouched. That way we can continue to get that real good tight fit. We'll sand everything else around it, and I would have already sanded the inside of the bottom. So this, imagine this part as sanded. Now that I've got that tenon set, I can hollow out the top. The top doesn't have as much distance in it, so people are typically tempted to try to hollow it with a little less attention to final thickness. But I have found that if I do that and leave this thick, then whenever I pick up this finished piece, it feels top heavy, and I don't enjoy it. So that's personal preference, but just one of those little design things.
You can't use the drill.
We could use the drill here, but with that ridge it put into the bottom of this piece, I'd like to just have a nice little rounded out lid, and I'm gonna do it all with the tool. So your box can have pretty much square bottoms and stuff if you would like. Your design is your design. And at that point in time, there's no reason not to use the drill bit. There are a lot of guys that make these, and they would get a drill bit right now that would drill pretty much all of it out. They would have a little scraper to where they could go in and touch it and sand it, and there wouldn't be a whole lot of tool work at all. They just have a square inside of their box, and it still holds stuff perfectly. We're going to cut from the inside out again, and we got to remember that this tenon is going to be holding this box together, so we don't want to get too thin on it. We want it to have some strength to maintain, because people are going to be, every single person that you hand this box to is going to open this box.
And
So
drop
it-
the top.
Yeah. So getting a smooth cut in this orientation is tough, because I can't be on the bevel. It's not possible. So I'm making a scraping, unsupported cut without the bevel. I'm still getting a pretty good cut. I'm getting some little curly cues off of there, but it's not as clean as it could be, and it's going to give me a rougher finish inside of it. So at that point in time, you can leave it rough on purpose, and then it's a design quality, or however we would like to define it. You can leave that little point in the middle, or you can get it out. So I'll take the point of the tool and just make a couple little circles in here. 4 instead of 3. So now I've purposely made it rough. You can hit that with a little sandpaper to clean up some of the ridges. I'm just gonna go through and get my thickness to where I would like it. We'll test it one more time, make sure we're still in a good spot. Those two guys fit together very well. I don't think they are bottoming out. You know you've done it really well when it's tough to get the bottom off, but if it gets a little loose, we'll tape it when we do these next. Close to being in line still. No, you can't.
Yeah.
So right in here. I want to get those back together. I'll bring the tailstock back up, and we will remove the tenon on the bottom while finishing the shape. To our downhill cut orientation. We're never going to cut into a big wall of wood. We're going to come up here and keep going down this way. Nice, easy one. And then I've established where my bottom is going to be, so I'm going to make some cuts the opposite direction. Nice and easy. We don't want to take our little cone here down too far yet, because we'd still like to have a really good grip on the bottom of this. But I'd like to take it down enough to where it's going to sit inside of my eventual base. That way I can go ahead and refine the entire bottom shape. Turn your lathe off to move your tool rest. Last night, that was my fatal error. I moved my tool rest into my tenon on the inside of the lid. And once you do that, re-establishing that tenon to the right size to fit the mortise becomes very difficult. Err on the side of caution. I like this shape. I just want to refine it a little bit and make sure it's still in round, since I have changed its orientation a couple times. And remember, we don't want to get this base too thin, because we will want this to sit up on the table. I like that. I'll take this little nib down a little bit so I can establish what this guy will sit on the table. And to do that, we're going to want to undercut the bottom a little bit. So just like with a good mug or anything, you want it to sit on this outside edge here. So we want that to be good and flat. And then we would like to undercut it a little bit so it never wobbles on the table. That gives it a really good way to sit. You don't have to undercut it too far. Now, before I take the rest of that nib away, I'm going to do a little shaping, and I'm going to touch where our two things come together with the tool to make sure we've got a good clean cut there. chamfer this edge just a little bit at 45 degrees so it sits pleasantly on the table. And then I like to hide my seam. This is one of those times where 3 lines can get you a weird gap between them. So I choose which side I would like my second line to go on, because one of my burn lines is going to go directly into my seam. This one I think I will put up top a little bit. So at this point in time, we sand everything we can touch. We get a finish on this bottom part before we turn the bottom off. We can choose 2 different finishes with this guy. We can use some of the French polish on the outside of it. The inside doesn't really take French polish that great. We could touch it with some oil or leave it a little plain. So we could French polish the outside to get a shine like we've got on our handles and our bottle stoppers. Or we could check out the poplar that we turned our candlesticks out of. We got some that has oil on it. Gives you a little more matte finish, a little more natural wood looking, things like that. So we can also oil these. That is a decision that you guys can make. If you want to use French polish, we need to do it in multiple steps. So we would French polish this bottom part at this point. We would French polish as much as we could at the top and then finish that once we get it flipped around. So with my grip between these 2 pieces, I think I can get away with turning this nib completely off while it's on the lathe. I think I've got enough friction in there to hold it. With tape around it for you guys, we'll definitely have enough to hold it. Something just popped. If you hear any sounds like that, stop the lathe. Let's talk about it. There's some pressure in these guys that happens in weird spots. I don't see anything that I am concerned about. So I'll go back and I'll start turning this guy down again. I'll whittle it down towards the bottom of the piece, leaving a little bit down there. And then I'll come back and make cuts towards the center to finish it up. Get it down, coming down the cone. Thanks, sir. Thank you, ma'am. So now I would have sanded and finished this so our bottom would be complete. So the correct direction to cut here will be downhill. I'm going to probably do some wrong direction cutting to expedite the process, but I'll right there, I was taking a little too big of a cut, so I needed to back out, take one that's smaller. Things were getting a little grabby.
Can you leave kind of a little handle
Yep, if you don't leave the little knob on the top of this thing, it can be tough to get them apart.
Yeah.
So I'll try to roll this guy up and then leave a little button on the top. Start feeling vibrations in your cut. You hang it off the tool rest a little far. So turn the lathe off, adjust, get it closer. All this time we have to be mindful about the stuff we've removed from the inside of these pieces, because if our outside diameter gets smaller than our inside diameter, we've got an interesting design opportunity. So we want to be mindful of how deep we go on these guys. Need a little more speed to get a fine cut, because I'm in here on this smaller spot that's not spinning as fast as the outside is. And now with that speed, I can make a really fine cut. So right here, we can turn this guy all the way down because we've got a small piece that's held in this chuck. Still wanted to have as much support as I could for as long as possible, but down here to this little part, we're good to go. So at this point, we would finish sanding the top. We would put our French polish on the top if that's what we choose to use. And if we choose to use oil, we sand it to our completion.